Mrs. Eunice Bentley, headmistress of the John Ford House Comprehensive School, and some 10 days before May 16th last, you engaged Miss Helen Lord, the defendant in this case, as an assistant maths mistress on a provisional basis. Is all that correct?
It is.
Now, why only on a provisional basis, Mrs. Bentley?
Well, in this case, you see, the post had been widely advertised without attracting the kind of response that I'd really hoped for.
Tell the jury, Mrs. Bentley, how you decide the suitability of an applicant.
You just have to use common sense. There's ability and qualifications in the subject concerned as a priority, obviously. And then there's confidence in front of a class, willingness to fit into the society of the school, all that sort of thing. And finally, background.
You make that sound a bit vague, Mrs. Bentley. What do you mean by background?
Well, the kind of life that the applicant has already experienced in teaching. You find that out from general conversation and from reference. A
reference is supplied by the schools where the candidate has previously worked?
Of course.
And what references did Miss Lord present?
To be perfectly frank, Miss Lord didn't present any references at all.
Silence in court. Silence.
Isn't that unusual?
Most unusual. I suppose I should have been forewarned.
Your Honour, that remark was uncalled for.
Yes, Mrs. Bentley, you're only required to answer the questions put to you. There's no need for any comment, thank you.
So, Miss Lord was without references, Mrs. Bentley. Did she attempt to explain this curious lack?
Oh, she did. She told me that from the very beginning of her career, she had only worked in one place, a mixed school in Suffolk. When she had left there the year previously, it had been with the intention of giving up teaching permanently. Now, she thought that a very silly decision to have made. She said that if I could give her a little time, she would do her best to obtain a document from the school involved.
And did she, in fact, send to Suffolk for references?
I don't know. Before the matter could be pursued, I'd made up my mind not to confirm Miss Lord's appointment.
What led you to that decision, Mrs. Bentley?
I'd formed a negative judgment about her.
You simply didn't think she'd make a good teacher at John Ford House?
That's right. There were various considerations.
Oh, what sort of considerations?
Well, one has to try and get an idea of the whole person, Mr. Lotterby. Miss Lord's academic abilities were, well, to put it bluntly, a bit provincial. There are methods and attitudes in mathematics which are all very well in the rural society, but which don't succeed as well in the urban context. And then I felt that simply as a person, Miss Lord lacked certain qualities which a school like ours must always find essential. She is a conservative and rather restrained person, whereas our attitude is forward-looking and engaged. We are educating children.
I very much regret that my client has become upset.
Yes, Mr. Dealey, I don't need telling that the lady is not herself.
Well, if Your Honour will forgive me a moment.
I'm so sorry.
Shall I meet with you?
Oh, no.
We can get 10 minutes, I can get quarter of an hour.
No. I'm so sorry, Mr. Dealey. Yeah, I would, please. Yes. Yes. Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm all right now, thank you.
Miss Lord is prepared to continue now, Your Honour. She very much regrets the interruption.
Splendid, Miss Lord. Proceed, Mr. Lotterby.
Just one or two more questions, Your Honour. So, Mrs. Bentley, on May the 13th or 14th, did you receive a letter from the Chief Constable's office addressed to you in your capacity as headmistress?
I did. It came on the morning of May 14th.
And did this letter mention Miss Lord?
Yes.
And did this letter in any way influence your decision not to confirm Miss Lord's appointment?
No. The contents of the letter were of interest to me, obviously, but by that time I'd made up my mind.
You dismissed Miss Lord purely and simply because you doubted her abilities as a teacher?
Yes.
And for no other reason?
No.
How did Miss Lord react when you told her this?
Well, that was quite extraordinary, really. At first, she turned deathly pale. I thought she was going to faint. And then she began to tremble. She was obviously very distressed.
Did she say anything?
She told me quite frankly that she didn't believe me. She insisted that I was lying. She said she knew perfectly well there was more to it than I was saying, and that she intended to find out the real reasons for her dismissal and deal with the persons responsible.
She knew there was more to it than you were saying, She intended to find out the real reason for her dismissal, and she meant to deal with the persons responsible.
Yes.
Are you sure these are the exact words Miss Lord used when you dismissed her? This is very important.
Absolutely certain, yes.
I see. Thank you, Mrs. Bentley.
Mrs. Bentley, what would you have said were your first impressions of Miss Lord? Good? Bad?
Reasonable.
Good enough at any rate to tell that she might start teaching there and then that very day.
On a provisional basis, Mr. Dealey.
Ah, yes, on a provisional basis. Pending the arrival of references, among other things, which in the event didn't arrive to help you make up your mind. When exactly did you dismiss Miss Lord, by the way?
I dismissed Miss Lord on May 14th.
On May the 14th. Exactly the same day as you received the letter from the Chief Constable's office.
Yes.
Yet you've told us, haven't you, that letter had nothing whatever to do with your decision?
It hadn't. Not in any direct sense. I had made up my mind about Miss Lord before the letter arrived.
And what did the letter tell you about Miss Lord?
Various things. Details.
Why are you evading the question, Mrs. Bentley?
I'm not. But I understand that the information was confidential.
It may well have been. But there's a difference in law between confidential information and what is known as privileged information. You may yet have to reveal the contents of that letter.
Indeed, the witness may, Mr. Dealey, but the court will make a decision about that, not you.
As Your Honour pleases. Mrs. Bentley, how did you feel about Miss Lord when she first applied for her job?
I suppose I probably felt a little sorry for her.
Just because she'd been out of work for a year?
It's a natural feeling. Whatever my later judgment of Miss Lord doesn't alter the fact that she seemed something of a sad case.
Did Miss Lord refer to this year in which she hadn't been teaching on a later occasion?
Yes.
When was that?
The day that I dismissed her.
What did she say?
That, in point of fact, she had been searching for a replacement job most of that time without much success. 4 schools had turned her down.
4 schools?
Yes.
This was before she turned deathly pale, looked as though she was going to faint, trembled, and so on.
Oh, yes, this was before I actually told her she wasn't to continue at John Ford House.
The revelation must have come as a nasty shock to her then.
Well, I suppose so.
The kind of shock that would produce an extreme reaction.
Well,
An overreaction. Mrs. Bentley, did anything Miss Lord say at this point? Did it seem... Well, did you think it was anything more than wild words? I mean, did you seriously believe in her threat to get even in some fanciful, vague fashion with some equally fanciful foe?
well, I'm really not in a position to talk about things like that. I don't know. Miss Lord may have spoken without due consideration. It's possible.
Now, this letter from the Chief Constable's office, I'm sorry to have to keep harking back to it, but you do at least confirm, do you not, that it was signed by Detective Superintendent Brotherton?
Yes, that was the signature, Detective Superintendent Brotherton.
Did you show the letter to Miss Lord?
Good gracious me, no.
Yet when Miss Lord went to Corderley Police Station, she asked to see Detective Superintendent Brotherton. Now, how could she have even known his name, Mrs. Bentley, if she had not seen the letter?
I can't answer that.
I must put it to you, Mrs. Bentley, that you allowed Miss Lord to see that letter.
No, that's
by
quite
accident,
untrue.
Of course, it was lying on your desk the morning you called her in to dismiss her.
No, it was in my files.
You're sure of that,
Yes.
aren't you? You mean you'd seen to it?
No, I simply meant...
Mrs. Bentley, Miss Lord must have seen that letter even to get hold of Detective Superintendent Brotherton's name. Now, you're not suggesting, are you, she came back later and went through your files?
I didn't say anything like that.
No, but are you asking us to believe it's the only alternative?
Really?
You agree it is the only alternative?
Well, how should I know? Perhaps she did come back after I told her she was dismissed. Who can tell? Poked about in my private files. A person of her character could do almost anything. Anything.
Of her character, Mrs. Bentley?
I only
But up
meant...
until now, we've only heard good of Miss Lord's character. And you've testified, haven't you, that you dismissed her from John Ford House purely and simply because of her unsuitability as a teacher.
That's true.
Your Honour, and there is an undertone of innuendo in this case which I find deeply disturbing. It's plain that there are things we are prevented from understanding because the facts as presented up until now have been insufficient. And I suggest there is vital evidence being withheld from the jury. I must insist that a letter from the Chief Constable's office to Mrs. Eunice Bentley be now admitted in evidence.
His Honour Judge Bragg now has to consider the arguments for and against admitting the controversial letter in evidence. How his decision will affect the trial of Helen Lord, you can see tomorrow in the Crown Court.